Good afternoon to everyone. I'm Myra Gooden. As Lynn has mentioned, I'm going to be addressing nonverbal communication. You may not know this, we do have a full semester course in nonverbal communication, which I'm proud to tell you I introduce and I teach. And all of your seniors, I hope that you're going to be putting on those funny black outfits on May 13th and taking the walk on the campus green. But if for some reason you still need 3 credits to finish up the summer, it happens that I'm teaching this class summer 1. So just a little bit of a commercial. I've been teaching nonverbal for probably 25 years. The field has changed greatly. The research has changed. When I look back on the initial course that I taught, I think, wow, you know, how much we've learned since then. But something that hasn't changed is people's perception of what we say when we say nonverbal communication. My favorite story is a number of years ago, I was at a party and I was introduced to a man who was there as someone who taught nonverbal communication. And he said, "Where do you do this?" And I said, "Well, in college." And he said, "Well, what do you do? Are you just quiet for 13 weeks? So I said, no, nothing at all. So nothing like that. So let me begin by just showing you what it is we generally study, what I'm going to talk to you about this afternoon, and why some of that's really going to apply to you, and I hope to goodness that this works now. So when I teach nonverbal, these are the areas that we study, and the ones that are in the bold print in large are what I'm going to be talking about this afternoon. Most people, when you say nonverbal communication, think of what we officially call kinesics. Kinesics is the study of small and gross body movement. Everything from wiggling your fingers like this to waving to someone way across the parking lot, but it's a lot more than that. It's also posture and gesture and locomotion, the way in which you walk. And people do build certain impressions of us based on kinesics. The misnomer, and I had written this to Lynn a few months ago, is when most people think of nonverbal, they think body language. And they also think that every movement has a meaning. And if everybody will just look up at me for a minute. Let's say you're a woman and you go to a party and you're playing with your earring. Well, somebody might look at you and say, another person perhaps of the opposite sex say, "Ah, I can tell she wants me." In fact, sometimes you're just playing with your earring because you're bored or because maybe you have an itch. And I always use that example to explain that there are not dictionary definitions to most of the things that we do. It absolutely makes me laugh out loud when I listen to a so-called nonverbal expert say, "Well, she's sitting like this and it means." I'd like to share with you that there are some things that you can infer from that, but absolute definitions, no, not by a long shot. So we'll talk about that very shortly. Facial and eye communication is actually also part of kinesics. I want to talk to you about the more common expressions that you see on people's faces. I want to share with you some ideas about something called affect blends and the way in which we deal with various expressions. You know, if you've been watching TV the last couple of weeks, you know we're starting to come into award season. The Grammys took place, the Golden Globes, the Screen Actors Guild Awards took place. When you see your next award show, and if they do the same thing that they do at the Academy Awards or at the Tonys, which I think actually is a little unfair, they'll show the 5 people nominated for the award, and of course only one's going to win. Watch the people who don't win. Some of them are going to be very good at controlling their facial expressions. Some of the others not so much. And you'll get that 1 minute where you realize they're really disgruntled or they're really angry. But we'll talk more about that with facial and eye communication in a little bit. Probably the area that is going to have least impact as you go out into the real world are physical characteristics, because physical characteristics are things that by and large we really don't have a lot of input into. My body shape is my body shape. There's not much I can do about it. I can try to lose a little weight. I can try to exercise more, but I'm never going to be tall and thin. It's just not in the cards. So that's something we really can't do much about. On the other hand, if I want my hair to be purple, I can do that. If I'd like to possibly change my appearance somewhat through plastic surgery, I have a certain amount that I can do. All of that is studied under physical characteristics. Something that will be important to everyone is paralanguage. Paralanguage is not what you say, but it's how you say it. And if you can follow my reasoning with this, the way you say it is frequently what you mean. Okay, and I'll go back to talk about that in a little while. Fascinating area. By the way, if you were watching the Super Bowl on Sunday, there was one commercial that had Roseanne Barr in it. She got hit by a log, actually, in a Snickers commercial. And I just wanted to mention her because when I think of people with voices that drive me crazy, Roseanne Barr is right up there, along with people like Fran Drescher. And you think about it and you say, oh, it really doesn't matter. But the truth is it does matter. And you do react to paralanguage. And by the way, on the other end of the spectrum might be someone like Morgan Freeman, who has just a wonderful voice. I always say, Morgan Freeman can read me the phone book. I'm happy listening to him. He's got a lovely voice. The same with James Earl Jones. Those are really classic voices, so we'll talk more about this. Today, we're not going to talk about haptics, proxemics, or environmental factors, but very quickly, and actually, I guess when I wrote the description, I had something else in mind. Haptics is the study of touch. It is the most fascinating and understudied area in nonverbal communication. And if you're wondering why is it the most understudied, well, people don't like to talk a lot about where they've been touched, how often, and by whom. And when we've studied it with surveys and done quantitative research, we find that people are not always particularly honest about the whole thing. But there's a lot more to it, and if you're interested, come and take the class this fall or write to me. I can always send you references. Proxemics is the study of space, how you use space. I have a question for everybody. In most of your classrooms, do you try to sit in the same spot? Okay, well, it seems to be a fairly common characteristic for people. And we find students sitting in one class pick the same seat if it's available in the next class. It just has to do with a level of ownership and feeling comfortable. Let me ask you another question. How do you feel when you get into an elevator? Or even a crowded subway? It's not one of the ideal communication situations for people. What do you do when you go into an elevator? Where do you look? You look down? Really? Okay, most people look up at the lights for the various floors, or they look over at the controls. This is all about proxemics, the use of space. I have another question for you. If you have the choice, where would you sit in a movie theater? In the back? In the back. In the middle? In the back. Yeah? Anybody say, no, way down in the front? Most people, as they get older, say, no, I'm not going to sit in the front. It's not really necessary. But that's what proxemics is all about. It's about people owning a certain amount of space. It's about something called density, which is the person-to-space ratio. It's about seating configurations. Again, it's really a fascinating area. And the last area that we won't be talking about today is environmental factors. It has to do with the lighting and the architecture of rooms and buildings, color. Colors really do have an effect on people. There's one really interesting study that was done with people, men and women who were brought into police stations and were brought to holding cells. When they were put in holding cells that were red in color, they became rather violent. But when they were put into rooms that were blue in color, it seemed to calm them down. So we know that color really is influential. The last thing I'm going to talk to you about today will be artifacts. Artifacts is the official name of clothing, but it goes beyond clothing. It includes things like these things, glasses or contact lenses. If as part of your daily outfit, let's say you wear either a scarf or a bandana, that's part of artifacts. And all of those things give people that we know certain impressions. So we're going to look at the bolded letters. And actually, we're going to start, though, with something just a little bit different, and that is first impressions. There used to be a commercial that says, you have one chance to make a first impression. And there's really something to it. So just for a minute, I want to talk about first impressions. Their official name is the primacy effect. The primacy effect. And I've got a question for everyone. I want you to think back for a minute to the day you met the person who you would consider is your best friend. Just for a second. You remember any of your first impressions of your friend? Were they accurate? Anybody? I remember back to the first day I met my best friend, first day of 9th grade, a long time ago. And some of the things that I thought that day are really true. Some were wrong, but most of them were right on. And nonverbal plays a central role in first impressions. Most first impressions are formed within 5 or 7 seconds, and they're fairly resistant to change. People do change them as time goes on, but not always. Now I've got a little exercise that I want to share with everyone, so if you have a pencil, pull it out, find a piece of paper, and we're just going to do this, so it'll just take a minute. I'm going to ask you 4 questions about each of these people. Now, you may recognize 1 or 2 of these people. If you do, I'm going to ask you not to shout out their name. And we'll talk about them at the end. The woman will be person number 1. The man in the center with his arms folded will be number 2. And the gentleman at the end, of course, is number 3. So here's what I'd like you to do. Number 1, tell me how old each of these people is. How old? How old do you think they are? Okay. Question number 2. Tell me if you think each of these people went to college. Did they go to college? Third, are these people married, divorced, single, separated? And finally, here's the acid test for you. Tell me what you think these people do. What is their job or what is their career? If you know who they are, then you've got a leg up on the competition, of course. Okay? So tell me again, how old are they? Did they go to college? Are they married, single, divorced? What's their marital status? And finally, what do they do? And actually, we're going to begin with person number 3. Does anyone recognize him? Okay. I thought it wasn't likely that you would. And I'll tell you his name at the end. So tell me how old he is. 32. Other guesses? 35. Anybody else? All right. You can give yourself credit for having the right answer if you're 3 years either way. He's 46 years old. Okay? Okay. Did he go to college? Number 3. What do you think? Yes, he did. He's a graduate of the University of St. Thomas in Minnesota. Okay. Is he married, divorced, single, separated? You think he's married? You said married, you're right. And finally, what do you think this guy does? Well, you got it. He is a writer, yes. His name is Vince Flynn, and he's written a number of political action thrillers. Very, very successful. Okay, let's go to the man in the middle. How old do you think he is? Does anyone recognize him? Okay. How old is he? He's 45. 45 years old. So if you said anywhere from 48 to 42, you get a point. Is he married, divorced, separated, single? What's up? He is married. Did he go to college? Yes, he did. He's a graduate of the University of Texas. Can you tell me what you think he does? Film. Sales. Well, sort of, in a way. Yeah, sort of in business. You're looking at Michael Dell of Dell Computer. So yeah, he does sales and he does business, so
I
yeah.
actually wrote down entrepreneur, actually.
Yeah, entrepreneur, you'd be absolutely right. Okay, and does anyone recognize the woman? Okay, well then, who recognizes her? Oh, you gave her away. Yes, this is J.K. Rowling, who wrote the Harry Potter series. How old do you think she is? Maybe you know already. She's 45. By the way, it may make all of you smile that according to Forbes, she's richer than the Queen of England. She's worth $1 billion. Yeah. Did pretty good for a woman who was a welfare mother. Did she go to college? No, she did not. No. Is she married, single, what? Actually, she's remarried. She was divorced, and she's remarried. One of my colleagues who was helping me get the PowerPoint together said to me, if she's available at any time, I'll marry her. It's okay, you know, and I said, yeah, all right. And finally, her profession is that she's a writer, okay? So how'd you do with your first impressions? Pretty good, okay. Question for everybody. When you look at people and you're gathering a first impression, what do you look at first? You look at a person's face, right? Or you look at their body. Okay, so you're going to develop some impressions based on that. You're going to look at their clothing, okay? And you may look at the way in which they move. So you may look at some kinesic dimensions. I'm always asked, are first impressions accurate? And I always say, well, you got a 50% chance of being right. It's so hit or miss. We're going to talk in a few minutes about people telling lies and how can you tell whether they're being honest or not. And the truth is, it's very difficult. The better you know someone, the more likely you're able to interpret kinesics, but in this case, you wouldn't know anyone. So, we're going to move on, and I'd like to tell you a little bit about kinesics. When I teach it during the semester, it's probably one of the areas that takes up the most time. At the top, you see these 5 words: emblems, illustrators, affect displays, regulators, and adapters. They are kinds of nonverbal behavior, and I think you're going to recognize some of the types of kinesic behavior actually. Emblems are nonverbal acts that have almost a dictionary definition. Now, if everybody will just look up for a minute. If I'm out on the street and I do this, what does it mean? Time out, yeah. It's time out, at least in America. So there's a cultural dimension to emblems. I said to you before, certain gesture, saying that a certain gesture has a meaning is really erroneous. And yet with emblems, we call them frozen meanings. Once again, they're nonverbal acts that have almost a dictionary definition. Look up for a minute. What does this mean? Or? Or remember when you were a kid in the lunchroom and maybe they put up two fingers like this? It used to mean silence. And something else is victory. Okay? Okay. How about this? Cut it. Yeah, cut off his head. Now I'm not going to do this, but if I shot you the bird, you'd all get that one too. Okay? It's a frozen meaning. Can anybody think of an organized system of emblems? A whole system? Sign language, absolutely. American Sign Language. I'm a big baseball fan, so I frequently look over to see what the third base coach is doing with the runners, and he's flashing signals, and he's touching his cap and his tush and his head. Those are also examples of emblems. Illustrators are nonverbal acts which seek to explain the verbal. I may say to you, move that over a little bit. But to illustrate, I need to say to you, move that over a little bit. Or maybe take it a little bit over here. Those are illustrators, nonverbal acts, which help to explain the verbal dimension, whatever it is. By the way, just an interesting little thing that I always remember when I talk about this. Americans do this all the time. If I'm saying to you, let's do it tomorrow, where do I gesture? Let's do it tomorrow. Yeah, forward. Most people will say, we'll do it tomorrow. How about I did it yesterday? Yeah, it's done. How about right now? At this minute? Yeah. Illustrators. Affect displays are a little bit different from the first two. Affect displays are the displays of emotion that cross our faces. I'm not going to talk about that now because the next thing I'm going to talk about is eye and facial communication, and I'll get to it then. Suffice it to say, become someone who watches faces. It really will benefit you in the end, and it will empower you a little more with nonverbal communication. Regulators. Regulators are nonverbal acts that help to regulate the back and forth flow of conversation. You're with your friend. You need to leave. You don't want to say, oh, shut up, obviously. What do you do non-verbally to let your friend know you've got to go? Do it again. Looking at your watch. I know when I'm teaching a class and students start to look at their watches, I really better move along. Okay? So you look at your watch perhaps. But you may do something else. You may just back away. Okay? You might do something additionally. You might look them in the eye more intently, but all of these things are ways to regulate communication. By the way, if you're talking to someone and the person wants to break into the conversation and you don't want them to break in, what do you do with your eyes? I don't want you to, I want to keep talking. I don't want you to have anything to say. What can I do? I can look past you, or I don't look you directly in the eye. And then that'll help me. Okay. The last nonverbal act up there is adapters, and I always think it's the most fascinating. of kinesics. Adapters are fragments of childhood behavior that we use to adapt to stress. Fragments of nonverbal behavior that we use to adapt to stress. Let's say when you were a kid, if you got stressed, you started swinging your fists. Okay, you started punching people. And then of course you grow up and you know that's not appropriate. But maybe as an adult, when you get stressed, you do this. It's an adapter. It also would worry me a great deal. Maybe you're one of the people who, when you get stressed and you're sitting in a chair, you start shaking your leg. Perhaps the fragment of childhood behaviors that you used to run away if you were stressed or you're faced with a stressful situation. It really depends. Sometimes I teach speech, and when I do, I'll see people, a woman playing with her earring, I'll see a guy pulling the hair on the back of his head. These are all adaptive behaviors, ways to deal with stress. I want to move down to those other three words, preening behavior. This is part of kinesics. Does anyone know what it means to preen? Yeah, well, yeah, preening. You make sure that your jacket is closed. You make sure that if you're a guy and you're wearing a tie, the tie knot is where it should be. It's not down, around the middle of your shirt. We preen to make sure that we look good for other people. Sometimes you may see people preening and you may say, well, maybe not here, or perhaps this person has excessive concern with looking right or just looking just so. I don't know anyone that's ever taken to task for too much preening, but I wanted to mention it here. I also want to mention positional cues. It's also part of kinesics, and it has to do with the way in which people sit. Positional cues would mean, let's say you and I meet at a party and we're sitting on a couch, and I sit with my legs straight out and your legs are straight out. It means that anyone can come and talk to us. But let's say you and I, we like each other, we've struck a resonant chord, we may turn our bodies and our legs in. And it says to anyone on the outside, don't bother us. We've now met everybody, thank you. We don't want any other intervention by anyone. So it's another kinesic point. Leakage and deception is fascinating. Now I have a question for everyone. As you were growing up, did your mom or dad ever say, I know you're lying. I know because. My mother used to tease me and say, you can never tell me a lie because you always start to smile. And she was right. That was the giveaway. That's leakage. Leakage is when you give away that you're not being 100% honest. Okay? Now, we may see people doing some rather interesting things. People who are sometimes leaking will shift their weight. They won't look you in the eye. You might see them, guys do this a lot, their hands are in their pockets and they're playing with change, okay? So it's again worth it to watch for leakage because people do give themselves away. Now with that said, most of us unfortunately are not wonderful at detecting that someone is being deceptive. There have been all kinds of studies conducted, and the group of people that is best at reading deception cues is law enforcement. Shouldn't surprise anyone. But even at that, not much better than 50%. I think the latest studies were 52 or 53%. So it's not a high rate of success in identifying deception. The group of within law enforcement that has the absolute highest rate of identifying leakage and deception, again, may not surprise you, the U.S. Secret Service, who are, of course, trained to try to find out if someone's interested, if someone is not telling the truth. Okay, I just want to take a minute of your time and show you a video that I put into this presentation. Long before you folks were born, Bill Clinton was running for president in 1992, and he looked to be the guy to beat when all of a sudden a woman named Jennifer Flowers surfaced and said she had had a 12-year affair with Bill Clinton. Looked like Clinton's candidacy was going to go right down the toilet, but instead he and his wife Hillary decided to go on 60 Minutes to talk about the charges that he had had an affair with this woman. So I just want you to watch them. I'm only going to show you about 2 minutes of this, and then I want to ask you about leakage and deception and what you think generally about kinesics. And I'm hoping that this is going to work. Just click. Okay. I'm gonna hope this goes. Yeah. Javon, I need help. There we go. Yeah. Let me just. No, will this just stop? Let's start.
In a tabloid interview for which she was paid, says she carried on a long-term affair with Governor Clinton from the late 1970s through the end of 1989. Who is Jennifer Flowers? You know.
Oh, yeah.
How do you know? How would you describe your relationship?
I'm very limited, but until this, friendly, but limited. I met her in the late 70s when I was Attorney General. And she was one of a number of young people who were working for the television stations around Little Rock.
Big hair, I know.
The people in politics and people in the media knew each other then, just as they do now. She left our state, and for years I didn't really hear from her, know what she was doing. Then she came back, I don't know, sometime a few years ago, and went to work again in the state. So that's who she is.
Was she a friend, an acquaintance? Does your wife know?
Oh, yes. Sure. She was an acquaintance, I would say, a friendly acquaintance. When this rumor story got started in the middle of 1980, and she was contacted and told about it, she was so upset, and she called back, she said, how can I be listed on this? I haven't seen you for more than 10 minutes in 10 years. She would call from time to time when she was upset or thought she was really being hurt by the rumors. And I would call her back. Either she would call the office, or I'd call her back there at the office, or I'd call her back at the house. Hillary knew when I was calling her back. I think once I called her and we were together. So there's nothing out of the ordinary there.
Okay.
She's a legend and is just.
I want to go to the next one. So, was he telling the truth? Well, you know historically that he wasn't. That he really had, in fact, been involved with Jennifer Flowers for years. But did you notice anything as you watched him or her?
He didn't, when he was telling the story, he didn't look at the guy in the eye, like he kind of veered off. And I didn't know that historically, like he committed, like he had an affair with her. So just from seeing that, I was like, God.
Interesting.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I just noticed that the way you were sitting was very casual, and that, I don't know what this says about her, but where, I think that says something about the way that they were directionally at him and not anywhere else in that intimate that you were talking about, but he was much younger and unique. And, I noticed his eyes started a little bit, and then we paused to think about what he was saying in a couple of sentences.
If we had more time in the next minute or so, the interviewer asks him, Governor Clinton, did you have an affair? And there's this terrible silence, and you see Clinton sort of shifting, and he says, well, I think that things that go on in a marriage are between two people. And later on, Croft asks him again, so Governor, be be honest with us here. Have you had an affair? And Glidden says, frankly, I think that this is not anything that the people of the United States should care about. Instead, we should care about getting our country going again. So he never addressed it, and if you watch him, boy, there's stuff to say. He's really uncomfortable. So, okay, because I'm running out of time, I just want to get through a couple of things with you. Components of paralanguage, not what you say, but how you say it. I just want to do a quick little exercise with you. Let's take the word O, O-H, and I'd like to ask a few people to say it for me, okay? Start with this gentleman. Say the word O to indicate great surprise. Okay, the young lady in the Ryder sweatshirt, to indicate sadness. Let's see, the young lady in the white top, to indicate great surprise. Oh, okay. You can play around with the paralanguage. We can change the meaning of a sentence by the emphasis. Listen to this sentence for a second. I will not give you the money. Okay? Now I'm going to vary the emphasis. You tell me what it means. I will not give you the money. What does it mean? Someone else may give it to you. I will not give you the money. I will not give you the money. You're not getting it, kid. I will not give you the money. You're definitely not getting it. I will not give you the money. I'll give it to Obama, I'll give it to Lynn, I'll give it to Dr. Rosansky, but you're not getting it. I will not give you the money. You can have the kids, you can have the Porsche, you can have the house, but you're not getting the cash. It's all paralanguage. The classic research on paralanguage says that voices have these 4 components. I'll just go through them really quickly. Voice qualities have to do with the sound of speech and how it affects us. It includes things like pitch and the pitch and rhythm, so the rate at which you speak, resonance, which is the way in which sound is amplified, your vocal tone. Think for a minute of a man who you're listening to who has a very high screechy voice. It's not a very positive evaluation that most of us would have. On the other hand, a woman with a very deep voice might not have a particularly positive evaluation. Okay? Vocal characterizers are non-language sounds that have positive or negative, that we develop positive and negative perceptions from. I want you to think for a minute to the last time you went to a movie and there was a funny line and somebody laughed. And maybe you heard someone laugh. Maybe you thought certain things. And then maybe you heard someone go, you think different things. Vocal characterizers include laughing, belching, burping, yawning, stretching, all of those non-language sounds, and we develop a certain perception. I was at a teaching demonstration last week. We had some people looking for a job in our department, and I'm sorry to say, a student let out a belch. Ouch. I felt embarrassed for him and more embarrassed for our guest, but that's a vocal characterizer. Vocal qualifiers have to do with the duration and the intensity of speech. Did any of you ever sing? Do any of you sing? If you do, the strength in speaking comes from your diaphragm. If you were a cheerleader, you know this. This is where the strength comes from. That's what vocal qualifiers refers to. And duration of speech is how long you can speak. You can speak, if you've heard those commercials where they talk about the MSRP of a car and they're going on very quickly, blah, 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 that's vocal qualifiers. Finally, vocal segregates are they're unvocalized pauses. So it's the ums and uhs and silence. And people react to all of those. I know as a teacher, when I'm listening to speeches, I always say to students, you've got to get rid of the uhs. And you've got to listen for it so that you can do it. But if you do get rid of it, it contributes to a better presentation. I also included extra-linguistic phenomena there, and I just wanted to talk about it just for a second. Extra-linguistic phenomena is another word for accents and dialects. We have in the United States today, give or take, 13 major dialect areas. I just want to ask a quick question. Is anyone from North Jersey? North of New Brunswick? Anyone? Okay. South Jersey? Philadelphia? Where are you folks from? Central New Jersey. Okay. Well, in New Jersey, we actually have two very distinct dialects, even though we're part of the larger Middle Atlantic region. But there is a very definite North Jersey regionalism, and there is a very definite South Jersey regionalism. I was born in North Jersey, grew up there, and I always talked about my family and chocolate. At least that's what I said till I majored in speech, and then they did away with that for me. If you're from the South Jersey or the Philadelphia area, it's likely that you drink Coke and that you wear boots. And if this doesn't sound alien to you, that's fine. That's what you were brought up with, okay? Quick question. What is the regional dialect that people think is, would seem to indicate the nicest people? Who would they be? People with what kind of an accent?
Southern?
Southern, absolutely. Yeah, the research shows that we think that people from the South tend to be the most hospitable and the nicest, but not the most competent. The most competent people are thought to be people with a New York accent. Okay, we could talk about this a lot, but in the interest of time, we're going to go on. Again, suffice it to say, it's worth it to know a little bit about paralanguage. I mentioned earlier affect displays. Those 8 emotions are said to be the basic emotions that cross the face. In the years since this list was first put forth by researchers, interest has really been taken off the list, but I put it in because it was there originally. Okay? If you go home and you were to look in a mirror and say, gee, I wonder what I look like, when I'm showing interest or anger, you'd be playing around a little bit with affect displays. Now, that said, most affect does not come singly. You don't just have a person show happiness. Okay? It may be happiness, but it may be tinged by a little bit of sadness, or it might be tinged by a little bit of anger. That happens. So we call those things affect blends. For the most part, emotion crosses the face in tenths of seconds. If you watch closely, you'll pick it up. You really have to study a face to be able to do it, but you'll be able to do it. The last 2 points were made, emotions were added by a researcher years later, bewilderment and determination. They're studied along with the others, and I would say, you can see them also as you watch a face. We have something in nonverbal called the facial affect scoring technique, FAST. What it does is it divides the face into 3 parts. The first is the eyebrows and the forehead. So it would go from here to here. The second zone would be eyes and eyelids, and then the third would be the lower face beginning from the bridge of the nose on down. Researchers tell us that you can see certain emotions better in the various parts of the way in which the face has been divided by the FAST model. So a question for everyone. Where are you most likely to see happiness? Which of those parts? The eyes?
Smile.
Yeah, probably 2 and 3, okay? How about fear? Where would you see fear? Yeah, maybe the eyes. Okay, how about surprise? Where would you see surprise? Your eyes, you could see surprise on any one of the thirds, you know, because someone might go, so you got that. Your eyes may open wide and your eyebrows might sort of go up. Surprise. How about disgust? Where would you see disgust? Most likely in the lower part of the face. We'd all sort of, you know, grit our teeth perhaps and be disgusted about something. It's again, it's it's been a very helpful model to help us study facial expression. Okay, very quickly. When you look at a person's expression, you try to judge it evaluatively for interest or lack of interest and for intensity or potency. When you look at something evaluatively, when you look at someone, you're trying to decide if the expression is good or not good. Something that I always teach in nonverbal, and I think it's worth it for everybody to keep this in mind. If you ever have to make a decision about which to trust, verbal or nonverbal, always trust nonverbal because it's so much harder to put, you know, to pass that off as being real. So when you look at somebody and you say to them, "Are you okay?" and they have a great big smile and say, "I'm just fine," but they're gritting their teeth, be careful. Lack of interest or interest, we look to people's facial expressions to see whether they're interested or not. And of course, how intense is the expression is the third part of all of this. You know, is this person really upset? Is this person really frightened? Is this person really happy? Okay? Something else that moves into this is how do we manage our facial expressions? I don't know if anyone plays cards, but there really is something to being able to maintain a poker face. A poker face would be a face on which you show little or no emotion. We call it neutralizing in dealing with facial expression, but there are other ways to intensify or de-intensify a facial expression. And I'm sorry, I know we're almost done with our time. Let me just finish up with this and then give you 1 or 2 conclusions. I mentioned earlier, one of the areas where you don't have a lot of say in what you're going to look like is physical appearance. And there are 3 basic body types. The endomorphic body type, the mesomorphic, and the ectomorph. Endomorphs tend to be people of quote-unquote ample size. We always tease in nonverbal and say there's a reason that Santa Claus is an endomorph. Why? Because there is a perception that people who are endomorphic are old-fashioned, nicer people, loquacious, meaning more talkative. Mesomorphs are people whose bodies are considered to be within normal parameters. They would be the more athletic build. And ectomorphs are the taller, thinner people. And by the way, it's interesting because the endomorph and the ectomorph have more negative perceptions about them, of course, than the mesomorph. So pulling this all together, as you go forward, it's worth it to know a little bit about nonverbal communication. If anyone would like more information on kinesics or paralanguage, I would be glad to send you sources and information. I think it's worth it to become someone who studies faces, who studies behavior, because those things, though this will never mean, you know, I want a Coca-Cola, will certainly tell you that there's information to be gleaned. So I thank you very much for listening, and if I can answer any questions and you're not running out the door, I'm happy to do it. If not, feel free to email me and I'll be glad to be in touch. Thanks so much.